Hi everyone, I'm Jesse Lynn.
And I'm Angela Lynn. Welcome back to another episode of But Where Are You Really From?
This week we are going to be discussing with y'all one of our favorite TV series that we have finished watching, season 2, which was out this year or end of last year possibly, Alice in Borderland. If you haven't watched the show yet, spoiler alert, you probably don't want to continue because we will be spoiling a lot of things about the show. But Alice in Borderlands is basically this sci-fi fantasy series, and it follows the main character whose name in Japanese is Arisu, so it sounds like Alice. And basically, they have to play a series of lethal games in order to get the chance to escape this like nightmare realm that they have been trapped in. So season 1 basically follows along where they are playing individual games. It introduces all of the players in terms of people who are fighting for their lives. And it also introduces game masters, so people who are like setting up the games. And so you kind of go through this progression the entire season where everyone's kind of being established. And then season 2 is really where they put all these like relationships into play, and they really make them work emotionally, all these relationships. They continue to play games in season 2, but the stakes are like a little bit higher because they think that once they finish the season 2 games that they can actually escape this like nightmare realm.
TLDR for anyone who just needs context, who like did not watch this show at all. It's essentially Squid Game before Squid Game came out, but sci-fi. Like dystopian Squid Game, because Squid Game was based in quote unquote reality of real people who get enticed with money to play these lethal games. And in Alice in Borderland, suddenly in the middle of the day, everyone else disappeared in the world and it was just them, and they were suddenly thrown into these games. That's the closest proximity is Squid Game, but Hunger Games-y. This episode is essentially like a reaction episode from our perspective for season 2 specifically. So this is not a spoiler-free episode. We're going deep into like everything that jumped out at us and things that were surprising and kind of like cray. So if you haven't watched the show and you care about watching it for the first time before hearing spoilers, just don't listen to this episode or come back to it after you've seen the show. We highly recommend it. I've said this before when we did the Squid Game episode, but sorry, Squid Game. I actually think Alice in Borderland is better than Squid Game in a lot of ways. It's not exactly the same because we've said it's like dystopian sci-fi, but I think it's better. So I would watch it if you have not seen it, and then hit play on this episode to hear our reactions to it.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. Like, I enjoyed Squid Game, but I like this a lot more because I feel like whereas Squid Game tried to present their world as reality, like what was happening to the contestants, this is like you struggle for a few episodes trying to discern whether or not this is fantasy or reality or like sci-fi. But that's part of the fun in watching it, like the mystery of solving like where they actually are and what this actually is. So yeah, I definitely agree. I enjoyed the mystery a lot more.
Okay, well, I'll kick things off with a very low-hanging fruit thing that jumped out at me in not only season 2, but it was in the back of my head in season 1, but because season 2, you assume that so much time has passed, this low barrier thing just kept bothering me a little bit, which was like, I'm sorry, you guys have been trapped in this world how long? Like, you have not possibly bathed, so you must smell disgusting. And every time there's like even the slightest outfit change, I'm like, where's this outfit coming from, girl? Like, you were supposedly running for your life from like game to game. How do you have a different jacket from last time? Or the people who are like exactly perfectly the same. So Chishiya, the guy with the blonde elven hair, beautiful platinum blonde hair. I'm like, as someone who dyes their hair, and you know this too because you dye your hair too, any amount of time that passes, your roots are growing out.
It's gone. Yeah.
I'm like, you have perfectly evened platinum blonde hair this whole time? Yeah, right, dude.
Well, there's definitely some suspension of belief. And I also find it really funny because in some of the scenes, as the male characters get like dirtier, like they get like mud on their face or like grease or whatever, like you'll notice that the female characters get a little dirty too, like on their body and stuff, but the face is like impeccable. Like it's like this like natural beautiful glow with just the right amount of like serum on the face, and they just look fabulous the entire time. Even when they're being like shot at or like jumping from building to building, like they just look great.
It's true. And the other outfit related thing that jumped out at me was Queena, who was the girl with the dreadlocks and who is from the beach complex. And she was always in a bikini top, bell-bottom jeans, and these chunky sandals that everyone wore in 2004. And I was like, girl, there is no way you have survived this long in that outfit, because you've been like supposedly doing like kung fu fights and running literally for so long. How is that even possible in chunky, shitty slippers and in your boobs like about to fall out at any moment kind of top?
I would be inclined to say, like, while they were at the beach, like, I get it. Like, that's the outfit. But then once they left, I was like, you're not gonna, like, wear, like, body armor or something? Like, at least a shirt.
She was the only one that stayed in her beach outfit. I was like, why, girl?
Yeah.
You don't need to wear the bikini top anymore. This is not the
I mean, we come to find at the end that it's all like a fantasy world anyways, and like the time doesn't move the way that you think it does. So you could theoretically use those things to explain her outfit and Chishiya's hair not changing.
Well, I think you already teed up the biggest spoiler alert. So I guess should we jump into our thoughts around the ending and what we actually believe is going on with the world? Because they still kind of left some loose ends out there so that you may not fully all think it's the same thing.
Let's start there. So basically, the ending is a game with the Queen of Hearts, and it seems deceptively simple. They just have to play a game of croquet. And the Queen of Hearts is like, it doesn't matter who wins as long as we finish 3 rounds of croquet. But if you follow the show closely, the heart games are always the most difficult ones because they require some kind of like personal introspection or like sacrifice, mostly sacrifice. And so while they're playing the croquet game, basically she's like somehow like probing his mind and like putting in these different scenarios to try to trick Arisu and Usagi into thinking that they are in some kind of like alternate explanation to like where they are. And that ranges from they're like in a sci-fi simulation to like they're in an insane asylum. But basically the idea is to get them to give up playing the game before it's over. And once they finish the game, the whole world basically ends, and anyone who's surviving gets to make the decision of if they want to stay in Borderland or not. And once the decision is made and everything's wrapped up, like they end up back in allegedly the real world, where they show that Tokyo was hit by a meteor. And like all the people who were in the game were people injured by the meteor. And so they were stuck between life and death. And the games in Borderlands were their way of fighting their way out. And something important about all the people who were actually stuck is like, these are people who were dissatisfied with their lives. So they had a reason to not come back, but also a reason to come back. And Borderlands was almost like proof that they deserve to continue living.
So much to pick apart from that recap, dude. Let's start with Queen of Hearts game. That was the first game where I was like really tripped out and kind of confused about what world they were really in. You mentioned that in season 1, right? Like so many things happen. You're trying to really understand if they're still in the real world or in some dystopian sci-fi world. But once you've kind of accepted it's like some sci-fi, not normal world, that's the new normal. So that was what I was used to. Things happen like laser beams coming out of the sky to kill people, but everything is still kind of within the perimeters of this physical world that they were in. And then when the Queen of Hearts game started and she transported them into that insane asylum situation, that was the first time where I genuinely was almost tricked. And I was like, so this whole thing literally is just Arisu on a mental breakdown, and he like imagined this whole world and it's all just him. I was really believing it. And then when it was starting to like crumble and you realize that it was a simulation that she created, probably through hallucinations, because they implied that she drugged them because she kept trying to push them to drink the tea. Yeah. So I
Oh.
think that's how they were trying to explain it, is like there was some sort of hallucinogenic. This is the first time where I was just like, I'm confused because I thought everything was kind of stuck in the realm that they had created. I was just like very confused when that whole mental institution thing came out.
I thought it was really fun because part of the journey is trying to figure out where they are. So the very end, I feel like the people who wrote the show were like, let's fuck with the audience. Like, we're gonna give them this like really crazy opening alternate universe where they're in a simulation. And then we're gonna slowly bring it to something that's like reality. Because even in the end, the real end where they're back in reality, I'm like, it's a little preposterous. Like a meteor hit Tokyo, like right at Shibuya Crossing. Like, I don't know about that. Or it didn't hit them at Shibuya Crossing, but like I don't know, the blast radius hit them at the crossing. But it was like, you got to that ending and you were like, is this the real ending? And then at the very end, they have that Joker card. So you're kind of like, well, what is really happening here?
I guess we're jumping straight there. I don't think this is the end at all. I think this is just another simulation type or game in and of itself to make you believe that you're out. Because, yeah, that they would not show the Joker card if it was actually over. And every time I finish a season or a series of something, I go down the Reddit rabbit hole.
Oh, same.
And they were saying that because this series is based on a manga series. So they were like, Joker actually was like a key player in the Game Masters in the manga. So theoretically, if he hasn't even shown up yet in the show and then they show his card at the end, you would think that the games are not over and they're going to just like take it to a different angle now. And yeah, it just felt too clean. Felt really clean to me if that was like the actual end. Oh, they all got out and they're all just have a second chance at life now. And Arisu and Usagi have this like weird connection. They can't explain that they're still going to be able to like be friends or lovers or whatever in this real world. I'm like,
There are definitely some plot holes, I think, in terms of believing whether or not the end is reality or not. I also did the same thing, and what I read was that there's like a second version of the manga, but basically like Arisu ends up back in Borderlands because he has another like accident that puts him into like a coma or something like that. What other thing that I found suspicious was that Anne didn't die. Like they showed her back in IRL, but big spoiler, she dies. And she's unable to say whether or not she wants to stay at the end. So she's dead, so she shouldn't be alive.
yeah, I agree with that. She died a long time ago. I mean, it was such a slow death, but I read in one Reddit theory, they were saying because they spent this whole like moment where Queena held her hand and she said like, let's leave, let's go together or whatever. So I think the Reddit theory was trying to imply that Anne was like very close to death, but maybe she technically wasn't dead yet by the time that Queena took her by the hand to say, let's leave. But yeah, I mean, that whole scene where it was like Anne, Queena, the beefy dude from the
Akane.
yeah, all of them that were like basically all dead and just like bleeding to death for the longest time. I'm like, y'all should have been dead a long time ago. This is the most dragged out death scene I've ever seen.
One of the, I feel like, things that's the most shocking about the show is that it keeps like bringing characters back where you're like, that person is dead. Aguni at the end of last season, like dead. The guy who got burned, the crazy dude, Niragi, who got burned and fell off the building, dead. And then the bow and arrow girl who literally got shot from her junk all the way to her shoulder, somehow is not dead. I was like, this is crazy. Like, if anyone's dead, she's dead. Like, the guy literally shot her like all the way up the torso. I was like, what is going on?
Well, let's circle back to the near-death experience explanation. The meteor strikes, everyone almost dies, and everyone who almost died are the ones who are in the Alice in Borderland world for the last however long. If you were in this near-death experience and your mind came up with this insane death games world for you to survive in order to prove you want to live, do you think you would live?
Like, do I think I would make it to the end of the games?
Do you think you would fight for your life? That's what they are suggesting all these games really is your mind and your heart choosing to fight your body essentially to like come back to life.
Honestly, it's so hard. I want to say that I wouldn't, and I would just like, do as many crazy things as possible before I get lasered. But on the other hand, I also feel like I don't want to die in any way, shape, or form. And that brings out, I think, like a different side of you that most people don't really know because you don't really think about it. I think about the episode where Arisu basically kills his friends, the Whatever Hearts game that they were in. And it's kind of like that, where it's like, if you asked me like on any given day, I'd be like, yeah, I'd probably kill myself and let my friends live. But like in reality, when push comes to shove, like, is that the decision that you're going to make? Like, regardless how difficult it is? I don't know.
For me, honestly, I think about this the same way I think about scary movies. And if I were a character in a scary movie, and I'd be like, no, I'd be dead real fast. Like, I 100% agree that there is a side to every human and every living thing, right? Because you value life, that you will probably do crazier things than you think you would to try to keep your life. But at the same time, these games were insane. They were insane. They were challenging in so many different ways. Like physically, I couldn't do a lot of the things that they did to stay alive. Like I'm a really weak swimmer. There were a lot of like water-based things. I don't know. And then all the mind ones, I'm like, I'm sorry. Is everyone who's winning just like a fucking genius?
Oh, I would die.
One of the face card games was all like about, it was all like mental math and also like probabilistic game theory stuff. And I was like, dude, I would be dead. First round, I'd be dead. So it's not that I don't think I value my life and I would want to like fight as hard as I could for my life. But I'm like, if this is the kind of shit my brain came up with to try to test me to see if I like care enough to live, I don't know that I would live.
Yeah, so put the question that way. I would probably try as hard as possible to survive, but for sure, any of those games that required any like brain power, like the one where they were doing the maze and then like one of the doors is like just fire. I don't know where to go. Like
that was the first game.
Was it the first game?
The one in the rooms that they open doors. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was Arisu's first game.
I would have died immediately. Yeah. Okay, I want to talk about this for 1 second because I find it so weird that there's always one really creepy rapey guy in all of these survival shows.
That was actually my only remaining thing I wanted to talk about too. Please, go ahead.
Okay, so the creepy rapey guy in this one is Naragi, but his whole body is like third-degree burns and he's bandaged like a mummy. So I'm like, really? Like, you can get it going with third-degree burns, your whole body's bandaged, like, that's the only thing you're thinking about? Like, I just think about, like, my life. I'm like, there's no way. If I just have a slight cough, I'm not in the mood. Like, it's so wild. And, like, I don't know if you've been watching Last of Us. There's always this one antagonist that's, like, very sexually problematic. And you're like, you've been burned, you've been shot, you've been stabbed, and all you want to do is fuck this person? I don't know about that.
Yes, I 100% agree. His name is Naragi.
Naragi.
I'm like, you should have died so long ago, number one. Like, you remember in the Naked Guy game, how he distracted one of them by spitting blood out of his mouth onto their face. And I'm like, I'm sorry, if you're coughing up that much blood frequently enough that you can just like summon that as a distraction, you are on the brink of death. So when he like still keeps coming back every single time, and when he almost raped Usagi, I was just like, how do you have this much energy left? You should have died 80 different times already by now. So barring that piece, just as a female, and spoiler alert, we're going to do an episode dedicated to creepy men this batch of episodes because it's just like always top of mind for me, creepy men. But I'm just so bothered by the fact that there always has to be rape as a subplot in every single dystopian, and not just like in so many movies and TV shows, but especially every time there's like a dystopian world set up, there's always the subplot. And I kind of had like a surface level conversation with Ramon about it when we watched that episode, where I was like, why every single time? And he was like, honestly, I believe that would be how the world is if we were in this setup where like there's no more money, because he was like there's nothing of value anymore in the world, so you're kind of like distilled down to your most animalistic instincts of like you have survival and sex are kind of like the only two things that the very core animalistic part of any living thing cares about. And so I was like, okay, I understand that rationale, but also I still am very bothered by the fact that this always has to be the case.
I think specifically for Alice in Borderland, it's very symbolic in the sense because Usagi represents this like very innocent love, and she's like the focus of Arisu's attention and one of the main reasons he wants to leave. So like I see it in the sense of it's like corrupting that kind of intention. But I'm also kind of like, did you need to show that? Because like they already showed a lot of Usagi's backstory, and like her backstory is not like rainbows and butterflies. Like it's very, very dark. And she goes through an arc in the second season where she's like, do I even want to come back? My life wasn't really that great. So I was just like, is it really necessary to use violence to show that kind of thing when you've already shown like a personal violence of this character and you don't really need to like despoil in that manner? It just makes me kind of uncomfortable because it's like, did this really need to be in there when you already had this story about her, which already shows that she's not exactly like, I'm a little fairy, perfect, everything kind of situation.
I agree. It was such an uncomfortable scene. And not that any rape scene is comfortable to watch because that's just a given, but it was so over the top. And like, if you didn't watch this episode, spoiler, everything spoiler alert, she didn't actually get raped. So at least there's that. But like the way he approached her, the like leading up to what you thought was going to happen, everything was uncomfortable. Everything was just like so much. I think the only reason maybe they could justify that scene being necessary is because she basically is set up to be this character who has like nothing to live for, right? Like she cares a lot about Arisu, but she expressed to him even directly, like, I don't know that I care to go back to the real world because I've lost so much, right? And so on top of everything else, she's already expressed of why she doesn't want to go back. If this thing were to have happened to her, she would be so shattered that you'd think she has nothing that she'd care to like fight for. But then in the Queen of Hearts game, it's her who brings back Arisu from this like insane asylum simulation to bring him back to want to fight, to win together. So maybe it's to make that moment extra compelling that like she really shouldn't have any motivation to want to believe in anything anymore, and she still does. But I still agree, it was like I still could have believed that without this like creepy rape scene.
Yeah, I don't think it was necessary. At the end of it, I'm like, if I erase that moment, it wouldn't have made a difference in how I felt about the ending.
It's true. It doesn't make me change how I think about the series as a whole, but it does leave a really uncomfortable
It's just icky.
Memory in my head. And then that actually isn't the only rape scene. I mean, technically it's not rape, I guess, because she agreed to it, but the high school girl who lost her, like she had to have her leg amputated, they show that she had to trade sex essentially to get this crazy rapey doctor to agree to amputate and treat her wound so that it doesn't just become death. And it was just also a very uncomfortable scene because that character is very interesting to me because she is very sexual already. She had tried to have sex with Arisu. She's like in love with a beefy dude and always trying to like be around him. On that end, you see her as like very sexually empowered and like a strong character. But then when you see her backstory that she had to trade sex to save her own life, it made me really uncomfortable because it was like, even a woman that you portray as like very sexually empowered, when it comes down to this like survivalist world, she still has to become a victim and she doesn't have anything that she can offer besides sex. It just made me really sad to think about. So it's like, so in the end, is all my worth just sex? If the world came to the end like this, like that's the only thing I'd be seen as having value for, it just made me really depressed, honestly.
Well, there you have it, folks.
No, that's too depressing. Can we talk about one more thing, maybe, to
Yes.
like not have that be the final fucking thing?
I do want to. Okay. We were talking about Chishiya for a little bit. I just thought it was so funny that he was just by himself the whole time in season 2 until like the very end. And then they meet up with him and he gets shot right away. And I'm like, okay, you worked your way through like some of the most difficult challenges. Super cool, like no problems. And then you just got shot.
I know, but maybe that's kind of how life is, right? You don't always have this glorious comeback. It's just like shit can happen at any time. But I agree. He was always one of the most interesting characters because he's clearly one of the most intelligent people on that show, and like not just book smart because he understands how people work too and what they're motivated by, because a lot of the games he won because he could kind of predict how people would act. I did feel kind of gypped when he got just randomly shot, but it wasn't that surprising to me. Also his reaction, because he wasn't that shook either, and that's kind of how his character is the entire show. Is he's kind of like, hey, if I live, I live. If I die, I die. Like, but I'm gonna try to win, but I don't care. Like,
I can't even imagine being the actor for that and being like, can I just add a little bit more? And they're like, no, that face is fine. Just like, because he had the same face the whole time. And I'm just like, can you show something? Like, even when they were doing the flashbacks to his life as a doctor, I was like, can you show something? Like, this is like before you were here. Like, I need a little bit more in the face.
Well, first of all, when they showed that he was a doctor, another suspension of belief there for me. I'm like, no doctor in Japan would be allowed to have that hair. No way. But they implied why he is that way. When he was first a doctor, he cared a lot, trying to be a good doctor and care about human life. And then when he realized that everything is just down to like capitalistic blah, 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 and no one cares, I think he put up this very blasé, like, I don't care about anything shield to protect himself, because he does care about people, but he doesn't want to care because he knows he'll just get himself and other people hurt.
I was just looking for a little bit more expression in the face. Like, I felt like even in the run up to why he's so jaded, he still looked pretty jaded when he was talking to that family. So I was like, oh, okay. Like, you were always like this.
There are people like that. I mean, I know people like that, kind of.
I guess.
Well, anyway, I guess those are like the main big things that jumped out at us. But there were so many things that were insane or like surprising or just hard to wrap your head around. So if you have seen Alice in Borderland, especially season 2, we would love to hear from you in the comments of wherever you're watching this, or well, I guess if you're listening to this, you have to hop on social media to tell us. But let us know in the comments on social media what you thought of the show and the season, the craziest thing that jumped out at you, or the most kind of like, what the fuck, why did that happen? Whatever you want to talk about with us, let us know.
And as always, come back next week for a fresh new episode. Until then,
Bye, bitches.